Hello, and welcome back to the Dr. Nobody podcast with your host, Dr. Nobody. Again, thank you all for your continued support and listening to the episodes and being so kind to my guests as well. That's been really great. Great messages I've heard from them, from you guys and gals. Just thank you very much for being so supportive. Today's episode, we're going to talk about imposter syndrome. And I think a lot of you, it'll probably be your first time hearing it. And hopefully for all of you, this is where you acknowledge it. At some point in all our lives, we experience imposter syndrome. And right now, you probably didn't know you have until after this episode. And you think back, you're like, yeah, I've experienced it several times. So, let's just kick off the episode with first, what is imposter syndrome? Now, I put a definition together based on the research and just other people, just culminating a bunch of things that I've heard about it and wrote down my own. So, imposter syndrome is this persistent feeling that causes someone to constantly doubt themselves and their abilities despite the evidence and fear that they may be exposed as a fraud. Now, what does despite the evidence mean? And when we go through my experience, it'll probably be more apparent. But essentially, the evidence that you're not an imposter. It's people acknowledging how amazing you are, but you're just still living in that fear of being exposed as a fraud. And throughout my life, I've experienced many instances of imposter syndrome. My jobs, with people, school, starting new jobs was never easy for me because I always, even in my experience as a baker or a ShopRite bagger, I would read books, watch videos, talk to people about it just to really prepare for that job. And I still do that to this day. It's a lot of work. But it was because I was scared to fail and I was very embarrassed. With everything I have and all the experiences, I've never truly felt ready for that next role. And even with my current career. And why is that? With all the experience that I do have, years of experience in the medical field and constant feedback that I'm doing well, I'm doing great, I still feel like I can't do it. I It's this insatiable nagging feeling that always tells me I can't do it. And I'm climbing the ladder in my career. I think I'm doing pretty well. People recognize what I do and acknowledge what I do. But I'm just terrified I wouldn't fulfill those expectations that people set for me. And I just want to quickly give you an example before I go into the nitty gritty and the story. Recently in my job, I was put in a position to help turn around a company because they were doing very, very poorly. They positioned their drug in a very bad way, meaning they just didn't get enough money because people didn't really know about it. So one day I raised my hand and I told them I can maybe help turn them around. What I didn't realize that was going to be 4 months of hard work and still going on now. And it was the hardest thing I'd ever done at that point in my entire life, putting the entire burden of a company and trying to save them on my shoulders. I am so grateful for the team that I had that supported me and my partner. She was amazing and was very helpful as well. And eventually, I ended up presenting to their lead medical people, to their lead account people, and even top people in their company to try to save them. And it was such an overwhelming response. They loved it. It was great. They just had never seen or heard about this before. And that night we went out for drinks, for food. They toasted for me. It was amazing. It was such a great and amazing experience. I can't even, thinking about it now, I still can't even put it to words of how happy I was. Just the culmination of my entire life to that one moment, that whole moment that was acknowledged of my medical expertise. And it was great. And I hope all of you experienced that one example at some point in your lives. Maybe not as big, maybe bigger, maybe smaller, but just that acceptance. So I'm going to talk a lot about my PhD in this podcast as it's brought significant experience into my life, good and bad. But before I go into it, just to give some of the listeners some context about a PhD, PhD is a terminal degree. It's a research degree, and the goal is, in order to graduate, there is no set curriculum for graduation, but you have to publish or you have to move the field forward, something that no one has ever done in the entire world. And I did 2 years of classwork in the PhD program. And this is just, it might be different in different schools. And during that time, I also rotated into multiple labs. And the goal of rotating in clinical labs or research labs is to try to figure out what professor worked great with you, what your classmates or your research mates, if the research is great, if you want to do it, if you have expertise, and then at the end of the day, you choose one, and that's where you live your life for like 4 to 10 years, whatever it is. Um, and I ended up selfishly picking the one that I thought would move me the fastest, which it ended up being correct because the other ones wouldn't have. Even during all this, I still did free courses, read books all the time, constantly. And the program, the one thing that I was so grateful about this program was it taught me how to read clinical papers or research papers. That's something I'd always struggled with. I was so embarrassed about it. I just didn't understand how to read a paper and being able to talk about it and figure out what's missing here, what didn't work, what's working. Eventually, I trained myself thanks to the program as well. And at this point, it's something extremely difficult to master. And I think I'm about there. I think after over 50,000 papers I've read throughout my career so far, I think I can say I'm pretty good at it. Um, and and it's okay. I accept that I'm not the best, and but I owned it and I got better at it. My whole fear was moving along during my PhD. I couldn't interpret these papers and I would get caught, and people would be like, why are you even doing a PhD? You're going to get kicked out. And that was stemming from an experience at Columbia where I had a class with a world renowned virologist that had what we call journal clubs, where you sit down and read papers and together as a group, you talk about it. And I got called out during one of those classes and I didn't do the work, and the other days I didn't understand. And I asked that professor to help me, to teach me, to get me better at it. And he did. That was the start of me improving. And when I finally chose my mentor, so going back to my PhD, I started my project and I quickly realized I was way over my head just in general in a PhD. Like I had no guidance initially from my PhD boss. Nothing prepares you to do a PhD. You can take all the classes, read all the books, but nothing truly prepares you for a PhD. You have to advance the research and publish something that no one's ever done, which I said before. You're advancing to science. There's no guide for that. Every day for almost not almost, but over for 4 years plus, I felt like I never belonged. And my boss did not help with those feelings because he always put me down, and also around me people were succeeding and doing an amazing work, and their bosses were acknowledging that, so it really put me down. I constantly redirected my feelings by participating in events, hung out with people, attended conferences, presented posters and powerpoints, played sports like volleyball, coaching, starting a new company, and amongst I know that was a lot, but there was other things that I kept doing. That was all to redirect my feelings away from my imposter syndrome. Things I noticed was that there was too much pressure to perform. And again, that was stemming from my boss, but also just the fact in a PhD program, you have to understand if you fail or you keep failing, you're only delaying your graduation. There's no one that tells you, ding, 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 you are done. You get to graduate now. No, it's on you. So if you fail, your PhD fails. If you drop out, you drop out. You don't get a consolation prize. This is not how it works in that field. Um, and this totally relies on you. So if you want to take 10 years, you take 10 years. And I know people like this. If I can do it in 4, which I did it in 4. But I always had that feeling of guilt and embarrassment to go back to my mentor if I failed an experiment or something went wrong, or one of the lab people messed up and I had to take the blame for it. I was a semi perfectionist, and I wanted to be the best at it. I wanted to be the best at my research, the best in the field. That was always instilled in me since I was young. I wanted to be the very best that no one ever was. Brownie points, if you know where that quote comes from. But I was always a true gamer. I played a lot of sports and it was just always win for me. Be the best and win. So pressure started to rise as I got married and I wanted to have kids eventually. Me and my wife, my girlfriend at the time, which turned into my wife, were making very little money, but we were both also getting older. So we wanted to save time for children and wanted to have nice things and live comfortably, which you couldn't do on a PhD salary and a private school teacher salary. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I was afraid of someone just calling me out. That's it. I'm saying it out loud. That's my fear. And there's going to be people on this podcast that are going to say the same thing and have said the same thing. And I just didn't want them to come up to me and say I didn't belong there. That would have destroyed me. Thank goodness, thank God, no one ever did that. But at the time, that's how I felt. I had no idea what I was doing most of the time. I had to wing it and learn it. I adapted, and eventually, I completed my PhD. It didn't help though that I failed the first time around applying to a PhD program. I failed, and not to make it as an excuse, because I am very against making excuses for things why you're doing poorly or whatever. But my dad had passed away that year, so it was hard. It was hard to apply. It was hard to do these graduate school exams. I just felt that burden, so I didn't get in. And people throughout my life did support my aspirations of doing a PhD and realize that I should be just like my wife and colleagues and friends. So I did do it. What didn't help was my mentor, as I will mention multiple times, just wasn't a good mentor. That's why I didn't really consider a mentor. I just consider him my advisor. He had never had a PhD student, which was my um naiveness that I had, thinking that that would have been a great idea, but it wasn't. He just, to his defense, he was just never trained to have a PhD student. So he built on those insecurities on me. He had no experience. I seeked help from other advisors. That's the thing. I didn't let that get me down, and I sought out mentorship from my friend from Vanderbilt. That's still this day my mentor and will be on this podcast eventually. But two professors that just changed my life. My first one was my first lab rotation. He was amazing, same interests as me, gamer, young, ambitious, great at what he did. And then the lab was amazing because everybody else was a gamer there too. It was just freaking awesome. And then my other mentor was a guy that was friends with my advisor at the time for my PhD. They were next door to each other. It was always awkward because I would always be talking to him or asking him for advice, but I didn't care because I focused on my career. My advisor didn't care about my career, and I needed to take that into my own hands. I had to take initiative, and that's a core thing here, everybody. You need to take initiative so you stop the drowning in your issues, in your emotions, and that's what I did. I grabbed the bull by the horns and I wrote it. Um, I kept comparing myself to other people in the PhD program, and that was the crux of this. That's actually the crux of imposter syndrome, is comparing yourself to others. That's the downfall for a lot, and it's not healthy. And I've learned my ways. I definitely have learned my ways. But anyway, through their mentorship, they started helping me feel a lot better about what I was doing. They guided me. I started taking specialized classes like clinical trials, medical infectious disease courses, teaching, tutoring, a program called What Could You Be with a PhD, which was a program where a conference actually, and a program, I guess, that you listen to people that have every single job, people, not just one person, every single job out there for a PhD except for a faculty or academia position, because I didn't want to do that. I saw what my professor was doing, my advisor, and I hated it. But that's what that did. Actually, it ignited that passion and that desire to finish my PhD. I knew that's what I wanted to do, and I loved it, and I was really good at it. And let me tell you a story in a second. It helped me feel better, motivating me. But, and I'm going to probably say this a couple more times, I tasted what I could do when I finished my PhD. That's the job I wanted to do all my life. I had no idea what I wanted to do with my PhD. I didn't know what I wanted to do when I was younger, if I did college, but this was it. And there was a program that I joined that helped us go listen to different people in different fields. And at that time, it was medical affairs, a medical writer. And I didn't know what that was, so I joined the event. And the lady at the time went around and handed out papers after she gave an intro, and there was an assessment. And I was like, oh, this is going to be so stupid. Like, why am I here? I had to drive like an hour and a half just to do this. I did it, and I kind of got excited about it. Like, I got it, I understood it, and I finished it in like a couple minutes while everybody else is hard at work. And the person that she came up to me and looked at it, and I'm sure she was just like, oh, this guy probably doesn't care. But she looked at me and she goes, this is amazing. I want your number and email, and I want to contact you. And it was kind of embarrassing, of course. Everybody else wanted that too. But she was trying to be nice and was like, yeah, everybody else put your names on here and whatever, I'll contact you. But obviously, she only contacted me and one other person. And that's my first experience in medical affairs. She gave me my first opportunity in the field. And from there, it was a snowball effect. She trained me, got me to a really great place. And I did other internships and I got more jobs after that and just set me up for my career. And yes, I consider her a mentor. We still talk. She's an amazing woman. She owns her own company, very aspirational and great. That's what motivated me as well. What helped me get over a lot of my imposter syndrome eventually, besides all these things, was talking to other people about it and commiserating. Once I figured that other people figured out, other people had it too. So anyway, after only 4.5 years in this PhD program, one of the fastest to complete a PhD program in that in the department, I'm telling you, I poured my soul, my life into my work, and I was just really good at it. Also, I wanted to get the heck out of there. I didn't want to work with this guy anymore. At my defense, I had such overwhelming support, but that it was my final gratification that I could do it. I deserved my PhD. I was at the top of my game. My mentor, my advisor, acknowledged that. He said that was really great, and I knew it was great. I did a great job. I really prepared, but all that cloud 9 stuff was great until 24 hours later I found out my mother passed away. You already know that story, and that's what really shattered my life and really shifted everything. As you know from my other episodes, I had already gotten a job in medical affairs. So I started that job in medical affairs. And when that first week of work, I went in there, and on that Friday, I was just like, what the heck did I get myself into? I have no idea what I'm doing. And my imposter syndrome came in like a wrecking ball. Man, it sucked. But we'll talk about that another time, about my career experiences. But imposter syndrome is real, everybody. Knowing it and identifying it quickly helps significantly alleviate from it. Knowing the signs and symptoms, where it's stemming from, because for me, it was comparing to others and just that pressure of life. I would advise you to seek mentorship, seek someone who can mentor you or advise you or give you just advice that you need, or just talk to someone so that they can help you, someone that can relate. But most importantly, get a taste of what you can do. There's plenty of internships. There's so many free classes online. You can do anything you want nowadays on the internet. You could, and even on YouTube, and just listen to people. I mean, I'm doing it now through this podcast. You're getting a taste of what you can do with my job. You will have successes and failures, and I've had plenty of each. More failures, I think, if anything. You fully expect that, so don't let it deteriorate your motivation. I had that job as a pathologist at one time. I got the job and I did it for a couple months, and I realized this wasn't for me. And I failed. I wasn't good at it, and people noticed. And eventually, I just quit. I just felt really bad. I didn't want to get fired, and it was a tough transition. As you know, I don't like quitting things, but I acknowledged my limitation in that role. My feelings were real. in that instance. And sometimes imposter syndrome, it's not imposter syndrome, it's just suck. To be fair, but you'll know which one's which. You never know until you try. Commit to something because you will have regrets. I promise you that. I hope you gain insights and are excited to find your own passions. This is the beginning of becoming a someone, but specifically the someone you always wanted to be. In next week's episode, we're going to have a conversation about imposter syndrome with someone with significantly more experience in this field than I do, and how she dealt with her imposter syndrome. It's a really great story, and I'm really excited for it to launch. I hope you enjoyed this episode because if you did, please do give me a like, review, and subscribe to the podcast. A lot of you are listening in, but unfortunately, I'm not seeing the numbers translating to subscriptions. So really subscribing is just, it's giving me acknowledgement that, hey, I'm dedicating my phone memory or computer memory to you, and I want to hear when you come on, and that's all you're doing. So there's very little effort, so don't be afraid to do any of those things. But you could also visit my website. There's plenty of things on there as my guest. Come learn more about my guest and me, and there's so much more on there now. But everybody, thanks so much for listening to the Dr. Nobody podcast, where we turn nobodies to somebodies. Talk to you all very soon.